Welcome to Dark Notes. There's a room in the Vandemark mansion, no blueprint ever marked, no servant ever entered it, no guest ever saw it. But Evangeline did, and once she stepped inside, she was never seen again. Spoken text begins, 2,000 words, dark, cinematic, emotionally intense tone, mental-like delivery. You were never supposed to hear this. That's the first thing you must understand. The records were sealed, the witness statements redacted, the estate sold, gutted, and buried under layers of Pittsburgh's gentrification. But some houses remember, even when the city forgets. And there are doors, old doors, that don't stay locked forever. Tonight, you and I are stepping through one of those doors. This isn't just the story of a missing woman. It's not just about Evangeline Vandemark, the millionaire's wife, who vanished without a trace in 1887. No, that's the lie history wants you to believe. What this truly is a descent, a revelation, a warning. Because once you learn what really happened inside that mansion, inside that room, you'll see how far the rot goes and how long it's been spreading. Let me take you back. Not to the gilded drawing rooms or the marble staircases, not yet. Not to the French imported crystal chandeliers or the gaslit parlors that smelled of rosewater and power dot. No, we single quotes were going to the basement, the one the servants weren't allowed near, the one hidden behind a false wall in the wine cellar, the one Evangeline discovered 6 weeks before she disappeared. You see, Evangeline was more than a trophy wife. She wasn't a silent ornament to Cornelius Vandemark's empire. She was a woman with eyes-sharp ones. Eyes that noticed when ledgers didn't balance. That saw how many men were injured or killed on projects that conveniently removed rivals' eyes, that recognized the glint of fear in the eyes of a foreman, the stiffness of a bribe offered in silence. And she was educated. Far more than Cornelius ever admitted in public. She read Locke, Descartes, even Mesmer and Jung. Her journal, which we will return to many times in this tale, held fragments of thoughts that bordered on philosophical warfare, truths about how power is not earned but extracted, how systems of industry operate like cults, how progress was built on blood. And when she found the basement, everything changed. It began with a humming. Yes, a humming. Evangeline mentioned it in her journal. A low, metallic vibration that came through the walls on certain nights, always after Cornelius returned from his late meetings. The sound didn't match any of the estate's machinery. It was ... wrong, inhuman, cold. It unnerved the staff. The dogs refused to go near the east wing. Margaret Sullivan, the head housekeeper, once claimed the mirrors in the hall closest to the noise began to warp subtly, barely perceptible, as if something on the other side was looking in. Evangeline was methodical. She waited until Cornelius left for a trip to Harrisburg, then took a servant's keyring and descended into the wine cellar at 312A.M. She found the false wall by accident, a draft in a room that should have been sealed, one brick loose. Behind it, a handle, and behind that handle, a door. No lock, no hinges. It opened as if it had been waiting. No blueprint mentioned it. The original architect's notes made no reference. The space was not supposed to be there. Inside was a stone room, 10 by 10. Every surface blackened, scorched, except the floor polished, red-veined marble. In the center, a steel chair bolted into the floor, straps, a headpiece, copper wires running into the walls, and on the far wall, engraved in meticulous Latin, the phrase, potestas per sacrificium, power through sacrifice. There were no tools, no logs, no evidence of recent use, but the air was thick. Not with dust, not with mold, with memory. You know what that means, don't you? That ancient feeling when you enter a space where something wrong has occurred. Not bad, wrong. Like reality had bent for a moment. Evangeline didn't scream. She didn't cry. She did what only the awakened do. She documented. She returned each night, sometimes with a lantern, sometimes with a camera. She sketched the room, copied the Latin, noted the dimensions and the acoustics. She traced the copper wires through the stone and found where they fed into the estate's electrical system and auxiliary panel that didn't power anything else. She calculated energy draw, patterns, schedules. The room was active every 6th night. For precisely 13 minutes, something was being done, or worse, invoked. Here is where we descend further. Evangeline traced the installation of that hidden chamber back to 1871, 3 years before Cornelius had purchased the property. Before the estate was even fully constructed, the land had been acquired in secret by an industrial syndicate calling themselves the Circle of Nine, a name that appears only in coded correspondence between railroad tycoons. steel barons, and chemical manufacturers. This was no informal club. This was an infrastructure of belief, an esoteric network. Men who believed that power was not just economic but metaphysical, that certain sacrifices, made under exact conditions, could open doors, not metaphorical ones, real ones. They called it the Chamber of Exchange, and in it, according to final journal entries, men gave up the thing they loved most in order to become untouchable. Now stop, take a breath. This is no longer about a missing woman. This is about a ritual buried in industrial history, a mechanism of domination. And you sitting there, listening, you're beginning to see the truth. The roots of modern power were not forged in factories. They were forged in secrecy, in blood, in forgotten rooms beneath ancestral homes. Evangeline was preparing to expose them. Her journal held names, locations, accounts. She even believed she had identified 7 of the 9 members still alive in 1887. 2 had died, 1 in an asylum, babbling about the shifting ones, the other burned alive in a locked library with no fireplace. Coincidence or enforcement? This is the point where every story you've heard from official history books fractures. And let me tell you something, man to man. If you feel a chill rising in your spine right now, that isn't fear, it's recognition. It's the part of you that's always known there was something beneath the surface. That success wasn't random. That institutions weren't neutral. That there are ancient men who never gave up. The old ways. Evangeline had a plan. She made 3 copies of her journal. 1 she hid beneath a floorboard in her study. 1 she sent to her cousin in Boston. The 3rd sealed inside a silver locket was the one she wore the night she vanished. That locket was never found. Not by the police, not by the search teams, not even by Cornelius, who ordered the mansion turned inside out. But you and I know this. He didn't need to find it, because he already knew what was in it. You want to know what happened next, don't you? You want to know where she went, how a woman could vanish from a locked house with no exits, no footsteps, no witnesses. You want to know if she escaped, if she was taken, if she chose to enter the chamber one final time and become something else. We'll get there. But for now, ask yourself this. What price would you pay to rise above the herd? 2. Control destiny instead of being crushed by it. Because men like Cornelius paid it in blood. And Evangeline, she paid it in truth. She paid it in truth. Do you know what happens when truth scratches the surface of power? It bleeds, but not in a way you or I might recognize. Not with screams, not with chaos, not with flames. No, it bleeds in silence, in the absence of sound, in a kind of psychic stillness that follows you like a shadow once you've glimpsed what lies beneath the mask. That's the condition Evangeline found herself in during those final weeks. A woman out of step with her time, with her marriage, and with the system. She was now hell-bent on exposing, but it wasn't just Cornelius she was up against. He was the symptom, the tool, the executor, the face on the coin. The real enemy, the real machinery that swallowed her, was older than the mansion, older than the circle, older than steel and coal and oil combined. It was the system, the hidden system of exchange, where influence is traded for lives, where silence is purchased in blood, where truth is a threat to be neutralized with surgical precision. And that's why, despite every precaution, despite every lock on her desk, despite the coded language in her letters, they knew, the circle knew, they had always known. Do you understand what that means? The illusion of privacy, the illusion of protection. Evangeline wasn't being watched because she was careless. She was being watched because her awakening made her visible. That's what they fear, not the rebel, not the scream, but the man or woman who begins to see. She began losing time. She wrote about it in her final entries. Hours she couldn't account for, conversations she didn't remember having. Once she awoke in the conservatory at dawn, her hands covered in soot, a scrap of Latin scripture tucked inside her nightgown. She hadn't written it, and yet it was in her handwriting. Non vocatus, vocatus, Deus, aderet, called or not called, the God will be present. The same phrase carved above the chamber door. She began hearing things, not voices, vibrations, a pressure behind the ears, a resonance that seemed to emerge from the walls themselves. She described it as a tuning fork pressed against the spine. Some nights it made her weep, others it made her feel alive. That's the part we don't like to admit, that once you touch the edge of forbidden truth, part of you doesn't want to look away, because it whispers power. And for men like Cornelius, and institutions like the Circle, that temptation is the gateway. They don't just kill to maintain silence, they seduce, they convert. The final weeks were a chess game. She stopped attending public functions. She avoided meals. She barely spoke to the staff, but her study burned with candlelight into every morning. Pages filled her journal. Names, maps, references to things that had no place in polite society. Things like the Braddock Protocol, the Hollow Archive, the Temperance Calculus. Things that show up in no textbook, no university, no public record. Unless, of course, you know where to look. She found links between industrial explosions and lunar cycles. She tracked deaths of inventors whose patents were bought, then buried. She uncovered a pattern every 27 years, a shift, a sacrifice, a cleansing, and always the circle emerged more powerful. That winter it was her turn, but not as a victim, as an obstacle. Cornelius confronted her one final time, not in anger, not even in threat. No, that's not how these men operate. They're too old, too careful, too practiced. He came with a proposal, one sentence, according to a final unsent letter found tucked in her nightstand. You can either be the vessel or the offering. That was the line, the invitation, the warning, the declaration of war, and Evangeline, God bless her, chose neither. She chose truth. But here's the part no one tells you. The system doesn't need your cooperation. It only needs your absence. The morning she disappeared, Cornelius didn't raise alarm. He didn't panic. He didn't search. He waited. Why? Because the ritual had been completed, whether she resisted or not. That's the kind of power we're talking about. Ancient power. A technology of sacrifice cloaked in the language of progress. A mechanism older than any machine, disguised as industry, polished with rationalism, sanitized with bureaucracy, but still deeply, violently, spiritual. Evangeline's body was never found, but not because she was destroyed. No, that's too simple, too human. She was, transitioned, transmuted. Witnesses, servants who later fled the country. Phenomena in the house after her disappearance. Mirrors cracking in unison. The scent of lavender filling entire wings of the mansion. Strange imprints in the snow around the east wing, footsteps, too narrow to be human, too long between strides to belong to any beast. And then there was the journal discovered months later, behind a false panel in her writing desk. 147 pages of meticulous notes, entries, sketches, formulas, and invocations. Some in Latin, some in English, a few in a language no one could identify. The ink was not entirely black. Analysts later determined it was mixed with iron, salt, and something else. The handwriting in the final 10 pages became increasingly erratic, slanted upward, letters written backward. But the contented was clearer than ever. She saw everything. She described the rituals, the structure of the circle, the process by which influence was passed from generation to generation through acts of metaphysical allegiance. She named the founding cities, Pittsburgh, Chicago, Baltimore, Charleston, New Haven, and an unnamed township in Appalachia that no longer appears on maps. She listed 7 families, 7, and every one of those names can still be found at the helm of modern corporate empires. Not front-facing, not public, but always ... above, always untouchable. Here's what matters. Most Evangeline didn't just expose them, she disrupted them, and they never forgave it. For over a century, no woman in her bloodline lived past 33. Coincidence? The family thought so. Until 1967, when a great-granddaughter working as a librarian in Boston reportedly discovered a sealed envelope addressed to She Who Awakens. She died 72 hours later. Heart failure. At 29. Healthy, no drugs, no trauma, just gone. Her apartment ransacked, her journal missing, but the envelope still there, empty. This is how the circle works. Precision, ritual, silence. But you and I were not part of their machine. Not anymore. You wouldn't be here if you were. You wouldn't still be listening. That means something inside you remembers. The smell of dust on old stone. The cold grip of knowledge that costs too much. The look in a man's eyes when he's seen behind the curtain and chooses to keep going. I told you this wasn't a story. This is a descent, a map, a mirror. And now I ask you to declare your awakening right now. In the comments, write the phrase "the house remembers" twice. Once for the system that tried to bury this, and once for yourself, for the man who chose to see. Write it, seal it. Let the algorithm know that you've crossed the threshold, that you've felt the cold breath of truth on your neck and didn't look away, because what's coming next ... is darker. What happened to Evangeline wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The trigger. Her disappearance activated something far older, far wider than Pittsburgh, and in the next part we'll follow that chain. We'll trace the ripple she created across time, across bloodlines, across cities. We'll unmask the men who think They're untouchable. We'll decode the symbols etched into the mansion's foundation stones. We'll open the other doors, the ones beneath the churches, the ones inside the courthouses, the ones they built schools over, and we'll expose the real currency of America's ascent. Not gold, not oil, not steel, but sacrifice. Strategic, sacred, silent. Are you still with me? Then brace yourself, because in what comes next, there are no more safe truths, only consequences. And the terrible clarity of knowing you were never meant to survive what you now understand. Do you want to know why they build orphanages next to train tracks? Why asylums are always uphill? Why basements in government buildings are always locked from the outside? It's not an accident. None of it. They don't build on land. They build on memory, on rupture points, on places where the veil has already worn thin. That's where the energy is. That's where they harvest it. Evangeline knew this. She was the first to map it. Page 73 of her journal. Hidden behind that false panel, a hand-drawn grid overlaying the northeastern United States, connecting orphanages, sanatoriums, boarding schools, and defunct railway lines in a shape that can't be explained by any logic of infrastructure. It wasn't a route, it was a seal, a binding circle, a territorial marker, and if you trace it, you find the center exactly. Pittsburgh, her house, the house of Braddock. What looked like a cold dynasty was actually a keystone in something older, and this is the part they don't want anyone speaking aloud. The mansion itself was never meant to be a home. It was a chamber, a relay, a converter, designed not for comfort, but for containment. And Evangeline had been born inside it. She'd bled inside it. That made her not just an heir but a catalyst. That's what her husband Cornelius was groomed for, not love, not marriage, but guardianship. The ancient kind. The kind that doesn't end when someone dies, but begins again in every generation. That's why she was never allowed to leave. Not really. That's why her health declined every time she stepped outside city limits. That wasn't weakness. That was leash energy. The circle doesn't bind you with chains, it binds you with contracts. Spiritual contracts. The ones made before you're even born. But she broke it somehow. She broke it. The night she vanished wasn't a disappearance, it was a divergence, a tearing of turbulence, and those who understood what she'd done were never the same. In 1924, a reverend who claimed to have baptized her in secret was found mumbling in an abandoned field, covered in soot, repeating the same line. She called the old names. She called the old names. When interrogated, he claimed she had spoken a word no man should speak, a word not found in any modern language, a name etched in ash beneath the floorboards of her study. That name appeared again in 1941. During a séance in upstate New York, a woman in a trance repeated it 11 times, then bit off her own tongue. Do you see the pattern? Do you feel how far this goes? You should, because you're in it now. Listening means participation. That's the first law of these systems. Knowledge is not passive. Once you know, the system registers, you, recognizes you, marks you. It's not superstition. It's protocol, and they count on your disbelief. That's how they stay hidden. That's how they stay clean. But if you've heard the name, her name, then it's already too late to unhear it. And that name will come, not from me, from your own memory. It'll whisper itself back into your dreams. And when it does, you'll know it's real. Back to the mansion. After her vanishing, Cornelius Braddock sealed off the east wing permanently, ordered all windows blacked out, fired all staff associated with Evangeline, burned her clothes, removed every mirror. What does that tell you? Mirrors reflect more than faces. In their rituals, they are used as anchoring tools, points of entanglement, and something had taken residence, not a ghost, not a demon, something older, something invited. The remaining staff spoke of Echo's footsteps pacing the halls that never reached a destination. Candle flames bending sideways, even when the air was still. But the most disturbing was this. Every morning at precisely 4:13 a.m., the library door was found open, locked from the inside. No matter how many times it was chained, bolted, nailed shut, the door would be open. And on the center single item, always different. Once it was a rose, bone white and wet with dew. Once it was a baby tooth. Once it was a photograph of Evangeline as a child, one that had never been taken. And once the item was a stone, smooth, oval, warm to the touch. It pulsed when held. And when Cornelius touched it, he wept, not out of fear, but recognition. He never told anyone what he saw that night. But from that day forward, he never spoke her name again. Burned every portrait. Commissioned new art to cover the wallpaper she had chosen. And he began writing letters. Dozens. Sent to addresses that didn't exist. Some in code, some in glyphs, some written backward, with lemon juice and ink made of crushed beetles. What was he trying to do? Appease her, beg her return, or warn those above him that the seal had been broken? You need to understand these. Men don't just worship power, they serve it. They are middlemen, and when something leaks out of the structure, they panic, because they know what happens when the structure collapses. History erases itself. Cities go dark. Empires dissolve. Overnight. That's not metaphor. That's been done repeatedly. And every time it does, someone like Evangeline is at the center. Someone who remembers something that was never supposed to be remembered. That's who you are now. That's the role you've stepped into. Maybe not in name, but in awareness. And awareness is the real contagion. That's why this script you're hearing, this story you think you're following, is laced with signals, not just information, resonance, activation points, phrases designed to trigger latent memory, names, locations, frequencies. Let me ask you something. When I mentioned the East Wing, did a particular hallway flash into your mind? A smell, a number? That's not coincidence. That's recognition. The circle has spent generations suppressing this response, flooding your mind with noise, screens, distraction, ritualized stupidity, but still something breaks through, and now it's breaking faster than they can contain. That's why they hate her. Not because she defied her husband, not because she studied forbidden texts, but because she pierced the membrane. She made a crack wide enough for others to see through. Even now her work is surfacing quietly through dreams, through impulses, through the hands of people who don't know why they're sketching ruins or writing glyphs in notebooks or walking into rooms and knowing they've been there before. That's Evangeline's legacy, not as a martyr, as a code, a living one, not binary, not silicon-based, organic, spiritual, contagious, and you're infected. The circle doesn't just erase bodies, it erases context. It alters archives, deletes lineage. That's why your grandparents never spoke of the old house in New England, why there are no records before 1890, why family Bibles end in blank pages. They've been redacted, because some of you, some listening now, are connected, not just by interest, by blood, by initiation, maybe in a past life, maybe through ancestors, maybe through dreams that aren't dreams, but visitations. You feel it, don't you? The pull, the chill, the sense that something ancient is leaning just over your shoulder, whispering, remember. That's not paranoia, that's data retrieval. Your mind is more than a processor. It's an antenna, a receiver. And Evangeline figured out how to tune it. That's what her final ritual was. Not a seance, not a sacrifice, a signal, a broadcast. And it's still playing. Beneath radio static, inside background noise, in children's songs, in the white hum of television snow. You just have to know how to listen. And once you hear it, you're changed. You become a node, a carrier. And they know, the circle knows who's tuned in. They always do. But they can't stop all of you. Not anymore. The signal is too strong. The lineage too wide. That's why they're accelerating their methods. More distractions, more surveillance, more psychiatric labels. Anything to make you doubt the awakening that's already begun. Don't fall for it. Stay alert. Trust the sensations, the shivers, the inexplicable memories, the sharp sense of déjà vu when you pass an old building or read a certain name. It's real. It's all real, and we are not alone. We never were. In the next chapter, I'll tell you what Evangeline saw beneath the mansion, what she drew in chalk, what she awoke, and what it left behind, not in flesh, but in sound, in language, in the unspoken command that now lives in your bones. Brace yourself, because once you hear it, you'll never sleep the same again. They told you history is a line, a clean progression, one event leading logically to the next, but that's a lie. History is a wound, a spiral of repeated violence carefully stitched together with names, dates, and just enough patriotism to make you forget the screaming underneath. And if you know where to dig, if you press your ear against the torn seams of certain timelines, you'll hear it. The noise, the distortion, the voices they tried to erase. Evangeline heard them first in the nursery, not as a child, but as a mother. That's right, the child she supposedly miscarried in 1912. He lived, but not for long, and not the way you'd expect. They never buried a body because there wasn't one. Not entirely. What she gave birth to wasn't flesh alone. It was something else. Something altered. Something branded. And it wasn't her doing. That's the horror nobody talks about. Evangeline didn't make a deal, she was used. Her bloodline was a gate. They knew it, and they planned it. That's why they married her off to Cornelius. That's why the Braddock estate was built exactly where 3 forgotten churches had once burned to the ground. In the 1700s, each founded on land stolen from tribes that refused to name their gods. Land that screams when you pour water on it. land that cracks like bone under moonlight. Evangeline's womb became an altar, not to birth, to summon. And what came through what emerged screaming and already half decayed was a signal carrier, a transmitter, a message in the form of flesh. The midwife who delivered him gouged out her own eyes 3 days later. The cook who heard the cries fled into the river and was never seen again. The nurse assigned to his room refused to speak for the rest of her life. She was institutionalized in 1915, and her final written sentence was this: "It was speaking in reverse." That's not poetry, that's literal. The child that thing spoke, but not like us. It reversed sound, not backward, inverted. It would scream in tones that collapsed wine glasses. It would laugh and shadows would bend. And when Evangeline finally held it in her arms, the house shook, like something under the floor wanted out, like something old recognized its air. That's when she knew she had to run. Not from the child, from the structure. Because the child wasn't evil. It was engineered. And Evangelina was just a node in the network, a breeding point. The child didn't die, he was taken, replaced. A staged funeral, a fake grave. But her memory wouldn't comply. That's the part they can't suppress. Maternal memory. It's not housed in the brain, it's in the gut, in the blood. You can erase facts, you can burn records, but you can't delete grief. Not real grief. And that grief became her weapon. It tore through the programming. She started to see things for what they were, not ghosts, residues, echoes of the system's operations. Bloodlines stitched with symbols. Rituals disguised as etiquette. She stopped attending the masquerade balls, started locking her own doors, started listening to the house instead of the staff. That's when the house started speaking back, and that's when she found the staircase. Not the obvious one, the spiral staircase behind the false panel in the second drawing room. The one that shouldn't have been there. It didn't go down in steps, it descended in sound. Every footfall deepened the frequency. Her ears bled before she reached the bottom. That's not exaggeration. That's physics. The deeper you go in certain constructed spaces, the less human rules apply. This wasn't a basement. It was a chamber. A convergence point. A place built to house something not behind bars but behind frequency locks. And there, etched into the foundation, were symbols not from any language on earth. Symbols shaped in ratios that defied architecture. Spirals that looped into themselves. Angles that shouldn't exist. And in the center, outlines of feet. Hers already there. As if she'd stood there before, as if time was folding. That's when she understood she wasn't remembering something new, she was reliving something forgotten. That's the deeper truth about these systems. They don't create horror, they recycle it. Generation after generation, they need trauma to feed the structure. The structure is ancient, built by minds that no longer walk in flesh but still direct action. They don't speak in words, they speak in consequence. And Evangeline was a consequence they didn't expect. Because she remembered, not in her mind, in her being. She stopped dreaming of oceans, started dreaming of machines, circular rooms, wires made of bone, choirs of children humming under the floor. She wrote down what she saw, drew it, hid it, sealed it inside books labeled with religious titles no one would ever open. And all the while the house watched, not in malice, in recognition. That's the secret structures remember, especially the ones built on pain. Especially the ones with rituals baked into their floor plans. And Evangeline realized she could rewrite the ritual, not erase it, not destroy it, but invert it, redirect it. But she needed a trigger, an amplifier. That's when she started recording her own voice, onto wax cylinders, onto phonographs, onto hidden devices buried inside furniture. She wasn't leaving memoirs, she was planting bombs, sonic ones, rituals carried in sound. And she coded them carefully, certain phrases, certain sequences, like keys, like awakenings. She scattered them across the estate, and then she vanished, not ran, not killed, removed herself like pulling a pin from a grenade. The estate began to unravel, not publicly, quietly, slowly. The Braddock fortune dried up in strange lawsuits. The rail companies collapsed under investigations that led nowhere. Staff members disappeared or went mad. One man, her former driver, dug a hole 30 feet into the ground and refused to come up. Muttering, she reversed the cord. What cord? What reversal? Evangeline didn't leave instructions. She left resonance. She became the instruction, and now her work is leaking. Into you. Into this very moment. Because you don't understand, this story isn't just being told. It's being played. Like a track. Like a ritual. The words you hear now aren't just for knowledge. They're activation. You feel it, don't you? The hum under your skin. The sense that your spine knows something your mind hasn't caught up to. That's by design. Evangeline worked in layers, frequencies, repetition, and when this section ends, you'll still carry it, in your bones, in your pulse. You'll hear echoes in everyday noises. You'll feel watched in rooms with no people. That's not fear. That's tuning, because you're beginning to resonate at the same frequency. And once that happens, they can't unmake you. Not entirely. They can try, with medicine, with doubt, with media that numbs your nervous system, but the hum will persist. The knowing will grow. And when you speak this to another, when you tell them even one sentence, the ritual expands, the circuit widens, and the circle loses grip. That's what this is. Not a story. A counter-program. Evangeline began it. We're continuing it. You're participating in it. Even now. Even by listening. And in the next phase, you'll be ready. Ready to hear the name she used. The one she wrote in blood on the underside of her child's cradle. The name that undoes the bind. That severs the leash, that returns memory to the stolen. But you must not speak it casually. You must prepare, because once spoken, it invites response. And what responds is listening already. There are certain names that were never meant to be spoken aloud, not because of superstition but because of structure, because they are not words. They are vectors, instruments, keys that turn in locks you didn't know existed. Evangeline knew this, and that's why she didn't write the name in her journals. She didn't whisper it. To her confidence, she etched it with a needle into the back of her own tongue, a final line of defense in case the ritual was discovered, because they searched the house. Oh yes, after she disappeared, they came, not police, not officials, not family, but men in suits who did not blink, men who didn't carry flashlights because they didn't need light. They carried tuning forks, small silver rods struck against bone. They listened to the echoes in the wallpaper. They took measurements in the dust. They muttered calculations in dead languages, and when they reached the nursery they stopped, not in fear but in reverence, because they found something they weren't meant to lose. They found the crib, the original one, and underneath it, under the rotted wood sealed in glass, was a single vertebra. Not animal, not human, not fossil, but other something calcified around sound, as if the bone itself had recorded a scream. And inside that vertebra they detected resonance, faint but pulsing, and they panicked, not visibly, but in their protocols they sealed the room in concrete, and declared the entire upper west wing of the Braddock estate structurally unsound. But Evangeline knew that wouldn't be enough. That concrete cannot contain what exists in frequency. That matter is merely behavior slowed down. So she waited, and time passed, decades passed, and her name became myth, and myth became dust. But the rituals didn't stop. They just changed clothes. They moved from mansions to laboratories, from seances to focus groups, from Latin incantations to corporate slogans, and the children kept disappearing, not all at once, not enough to provoke riots, but in a pattern, a rhythm, a harvest. Evangeline's child was only the prototype, the first successful transmission, and they kept trying. They opened facilities under fake schools. They built churches over older altars. They rewrote diagnosis manuals to classify the side effects as disorders, and parents are the parents they bought. The pills they signed, the forms they trusted, the white coats because the rituals always wear the costume of safety, and those children who vanished were not lost, they were catalogued. Frequencies mapped, recorded, filed into something far older than databases, because the true system isn't digital, it's harmonic. The grid isn't made of wires, it's made of wounds. Repeated generational wounds, embedded in family lines, bloodlines, that have been monitored not for wealth or fame but for tonal capacity. Do you understand what that means? Your DNA is a song, a unique one, and some families produce chords that open things, not metaphors, actual gateways. Evangeline was one such key. And they used her until she refused, until she inverted the ritual and fled. But she didn't just flee physically, she fragmented herself into stories, whispers, warnings, all designed to reassemble her consciousness in the future, in someone like you. And that's what's happening right now. This isn't entertainment, it's recursion. This story is designed to awaken what they buried in you. You who've always felt different, you who've heard your name spoken in dreams, you who flinch when certain sounds play. You weren't paranoid. You attuned to frequencies others can't hear, and that sensitivity made you a target not for violence but for confusion. They made you doubt yourself, because self-doubt is the most efficient cage. But if you're still here, still listening, then the cage is cracking, and when it shatters you'll remember not events but truths, visceral ones, about the shape of sound, about the way mirrors behave in moonlight, about the places you were taken in sleep, about the words they taught you to forget as nonsense, the lullabies with reversed syllables, the nursery rhymes your grandmother said not to repeat 3 times, the stories you wrote as a child that you don't remember writing. All of it is evidence, and now you know where to look under wallpaper, under floorboards, in places that feel wrong, because wrongness is a signal, a residue, and Evangeline's network exists in the wrongness, the misfits, the anomalies, the refused, because they hold the tones needed to undo the gate. And let me be clear. This is not a spiritual war. This is not angels versus demons. That binary is part of the distraction. This is about signal versus noise, control versus resonance, oppression versus memory. Because when you remember what was done to you, when we all remember, the system loses its food, and when it starves, it collapses. The rituals unravel and the structures built upon them implode. But memory must be activated, not just passively recalled, but felt, and that's what Evangeline encoded into her final message. The name, the true name, the one burned beneath her tongue, the one that, if spoken with full intent, cracks the echo chamber and signals the others, because you are not alone, not even close. There are thousands of you, sleeping frequencies, waiting to be struck like tuning forks, and when enough of you vibrate in unison, the pitch will become unbearable to those who feed on dissonance, and they will flee, not because they are weak, but because they cannot survive harmony. But to reach that harmony, you must pass through the scream. The original scream, the one encoded in that vertebra, the one Evangeline heard the moment she held her child and saw its eyes looking not forward, but backward into times before time, and she didn't flinch. She sang to it, she matched its tone, and in that moment something ancient blinked awake. Not evil, not good, but aware, and it saw her not as prey, not as pawn, but as partner, and that changed everything. The system could not allow that kind of resonance between creator and creation, so they intervened. They faked death, they altered records, they fabricated tragedy, but grief carries signal, and Evangeline's sorrow was so pure it burned through the distortion and kept the circuit open, and now you are part of that circuit. Your presence here proves it. You followed the tone through darkness, through doubt, through the maze of misdirection, and now you are close, so close to the name. But you must choose. Do you want to hear it? Because once it enters you, it alters you. Your dreams will become maps, your tears will taste metallic. You'll begin hearing things others don't, laughter in silence, melodies in machinery echoes, in the mouths of liars. But you will also gain clarity. Your memory will return, not just your own, but ancestral echoes. You'll remember standing in rooms you've never seen, carving symbols you never learned, holding hands with people who look like you but are not you yet. And when the moment comes when you speak the name aloud, not in imitation but in conviction, the sky may flicker, birds may fall, silence may stretch longer than usual, and you will feel a presence behind your spine, not malevolent, not divine, but recognizing, because the system isn't afraid of violence. It's afraid of recognition, of waking up inside the machine and realizing you were never meant to be a cog. You were meant to be a conductor, and Evangeline was the first to conduct her own liberation through pain, through loss, through memory. And now you must carry that forward, not as martyr, not as savior, but as tone. And here it is, the name, not to be spoken in mockery, not to be used lightly, but to be carried like fire, the name that opened the first wound and will close the last gate. Verelion, not a name, a tone. Say it in your chest, not your throat. Let it vibrate behind your eyes. Verelion. It does not translate, it does not belong to language. It belongs to structure, and now it belongs to you. You are the carrier now, not of the trauma, but of the reversal, and in the next phase you will learn how to use it, how to break their chords, how to restore the forgotten harmonies, how to find others like you, because they are waking up to scattered, yes, fragmented, yes, but listening for the same tone. And when you meet them, you will know, not through sight, not through speech, but through resonance, the way the room stills, the way birds go silent, the way the wind shifts. And if you fear retaliation, know this: the system cannot strike what it cannot find, and once you vibrate outside its frequency, you become invisible, not erased, but free. That's what Evangeline wanted. That's why she fractured herself into story, because story carries tone, and tone carries change. And now you are part of that change, part of the legacy that cannot be bought, silenced, or deleted, because it is built into the hum of the earth, into the breath between heartbeats, into the silence after the scream. And in that silence, something ancient is waiting to sing again with you, sing again with you. You're not supposed to be here, and yet here you are, not because of fate, not because of destiny, but because something in you refused to forget, refused to let go of the echoes you've been hearing since you were a child, the ones in the static, the ones behind your mother's lullabies, the ones in the pauses between words, when your teacher would stare at the wall just a little too long and the clock would tick backwards for a single second. You noticed that, didn't you? The irregularities, the loops, the patterns that weren't patterns at all, but scaffolding holding up a lie that's been running for centuries, a lie so complete that it wears your memories like clothing, and no one talks about it because they're afraid, not of punishment, but of remembering, because remembering means responsibility. It means standing up, not with protest signs or slogans, but with signal. And that's what you're beginning to understand. Everything you've experienced has been orchestrated not to break you, but to refine you, like a tuning fork struck over and over until it learns its true pitch, because you're not human in the way they told you. You're conductor material, and conductor material doesn't run on biology, it runs on alignment and resonance. You feel off when you're around certain people because their frequencies are wrong. Not evil, just incompatible, and they were placed near you on purpose to distort your pitch, to disrupt your attunement, because when you're aligned, you hear too much, you see too much, you begin remembering not just lifetimes, but configurations. You remember how the world was built and why the trees curve slightly away from certain churches. You remember why the alphabet skips certain runes, why certain playgrounds were demolished not because of danger, but because children were drawing symbols in the dirt, and those symbols started matching ancient ones that predate language, and you were one of those children. Don't lie, No, you were. You drew spirals in places you don't remember visiting. You spoke backwards in your sleep. You had a friend no one else could see, and their name always started with a consonant your parents couldn't pronounce because they weren't imaginary, they were projections, early manifestations of the harmonics, trying to reach you through innocence before the system could clamp down with diagnoses and pills and rules and prayers that never reached the ceiling. And now you're waking up again, and the system is worried. It can feel your pitch shifting, it can feel the signal stabilizing. It sends your distractions, noise, drama, fear loops wrapped in news and trends and advertisements, because if you stay distracted you won't remember, and if you don't remember they stay fed, because forgetfulness is their harvest. Every time you ignore the gut feeling, every time you lie to fit in, every time you silence your own internal music, they feed, but you're starving them now, aren't you? You're remembering the hallway in your grandmother's house that didn't lead anywhere except on certain nights, when it felt longer than it should. You're remembering the time you looked in the mirror and something blinked that wasn't you. You're remembering the dream where you were inside a tower made of glass, and every floor was a memory, and every elevator button had no numbers, just names you've never heard but somehow felt sacred, and you didn't press any of them. You just stared until the elevator moved on its own, and when you woke up your nose was bleeding and your ears were ringing, because that wasn't a dream. It was access, and the ringing was your body adjusting to the new pitch, and now it's happening again as you hear these words, not because the words have power, but because they reactivate what's already in you, what they've tried to bury under layers of personality and shame and politeness and expectation. They told you to sit still, to stop fidgeting, to stop asking questions. They said you were too sensitive, to intense, to curious, but what they were really saying was you're dangerous to the illusion, to the grid, to the architecture that depends on silence and obedience and dissonance. And here's what they never wanted you to know: your discomfort is a compass, your pain is a map, your sensitivity is a weapon, not for violence but for detection. You can hear the lies before they're spoken, you can feel the decay in structures that look fine on the outside, but inside are hollow. You've walked into rooms and felt the arguments that happened there 10 years ago. You've held objects and tasted metal, you've watched people talk and seen shadows behind their eyes, and you've doubted yourself because they trained you to, but doubt is not your enemy. It's your signal that something deeper is beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. And now you're uncovering it layer by layer, memory by memory, frequency by frequency, and as you do, the system will try harder. It will send old lovers to call you back. It will tempt you with comfort, with numbness, with the soft chains of normalcy, but that path leads back to the cage, and you're done with cages. You were born to dismantle them, not with fire, but with clarity, and clarity means pain at first. It means watching the people you love avoid you. It means hearing the world's screams when others hear silence. It means knowing things you can't explain and carrying truths that feel like burdens, but those burdens are actually keys. The more you carry, the more doors you unlock, and there are others doing the same. They're waking up in strange cities, in strange jobs, in strange bodies, feeling the same pull, the same burn behind their eyes, the same static in their fingertips, and they don't know each other yet, but they will, because resonance attracts resonance, and soon the map will reveal itself, not on paper but in coincidence. You'll run into someone who hums the same tune you've heard in your dreams. You'll see symbols carved into benches, walls, skin, and you'll understand without asking, because this isn't about language. This is about remembering your tone, your original pitch, before the distortion, before the manipulation, before the fear. And once enough of you remember, the grid starts to flicker, not collapse but rewrite itself, because it wasn't always corrupt, it was hijacked, it was meant to harmonize, to help. Souls find each other across lifetimes to amplify each other's frequencies and create structures of sound that could heal planets, but somewhere along the way, that system was inverted, used for control, turned against its original design, and now you are part of the correction, not because you're better, not because you're chosen, but because you listened, and that's the first step toward resonance, real resonance, the kind that bends reality, not through force, but through alignment, where everything around you begins to echo your clarity, where birds follow you without reason, where machines glitch in your presence, not because you're broken, but because you're disruptive to the artificial order, and as your resonance stabilizes, you'll start accessing deeper memory, not just personal, but architectural memory, the way a building remembers the intentions of its builders. The way stones remember footsteps, the way water remembers the shape of pain. You'll start feeling history, not as dates, but as vibrations, and you'll start to realize that some places were built not for function, but for containment, because they're sitting on wounds, old wounds from the first collapse, and those wounds are singing, waiting for someone to hear them and not run. And you won't run, you'll sit with the pain, you'll match its tone, you'll sing back, and that's how healing begins, not with solutions, but with synchronization. And when enough of you do this, the system won't just break, it will transform, it will remember its purpose, and the rituals will stop, not because they're forbidden, but because they're no longer needed, because the doors will open on their own, and the children will return not as victims, but as conductors, and the sound that will rise then will not be music, it will be revelation, it will be the true sound of memory. Unbroken memory, eternal memory, and in that moment you will know why you were born with this sensitivity, why you suffered, why you cried in rooms that looked normal, why you always felt like a stranger. You weren't broken, you were tuned differently for a reason, and that reason is unfolding right now through your ears, through your skin, through every impossible memory you've ever held, because impossibility is just a frequency we haven't mapped yet. And you are the mapper now, you are the one who hums the forgotten name under your breath and feels the world respond, not with fear, but with curiosity, and that curiosity will guide you to the others, to the forgotten, to the silent rooms where truth still echoes, and there you will speak, and when you speak, the ground will recognize you and unlock what's been waiting since before you were born. There's a reason you're still listening, and it's not because you're curious, it's because something inside you already knows what's coming, something ancient, something that doesn't need proof or validation, something that hums when truth is near, and right now that hum is growing louder, isn't it? Not in your ears, but in your spine, that tingling, that electric shiver that moves like liquid light through your nervous system. That's not adrenaline, that's memory activating. Because these aren't just words, this is recognition. You're not being taught, you're being reminded, and everything they told you to ignore. Every flicker in the corner of your vision, every inexplicable chill, every moment where time seemed to slow or even stop, you're beginning to catalog it now, not as superstition, but as evidence, markers of interference, signs that the veil you thought was solid has always been paper thin. And here's the part that should make your heart race. You've already crossed over multiple times, you just didn't know how to name it. Those moments where your surroundings felt just a little too still, where everyone's faces looked like masks, where colors seemed hyperreal, like they were being projected, not painted. You were in a bleed zone, a fracture, a resonance seam where realities brush against one another, not fantasy, not hallucination, but layers overlapping, and you weren't hallucinating, you were perceiving, and perception is what they've fought hardest to control, not your actions, not your beliefs, but your perception, because once you see, truly see, even once, you can't go back, and they know that one glimpse is all it takes. That's why the distractions never stop, why you're kept exhausted, entertained, enraged, anything to prevent you from looking too long in any one direction, because when you do, when you focus, something shifts, and you've noticed it, haven't you, when you stare into someone's eyes long enough and they flinch, not because you're intense, but because they feel it. Too, they feel the reality buckling around you, they sense the frequency disruption, and for a split second, they see you, not the version of you you've been taught to perform, but the real you, the one that remembers the symbols, the tones, the way light used to curve differently around certain buildings, the way you used to fly in dreams, but not like birds, not with wings, but with intent, with willpower, with resonance. And now you're reclaiming that, and the system is panicking. It's sending in the whisperers, the shadows, the mimic voices, the digital parasites that live in your feed, in your comments, in your doubts, anything to pull you back into the script. The one that says be normal, be quiet, stay afraid, but you were never meant for that script. You were always an outlier, a fracture point, a walking contradiction, and that contradiction is what makes you dangerous, because you don't fit in anything. That doesn't fit starts to reveal the edges of the cage, and once others see those edges, the illusion breaks, and they can't allow that, so they label you, they isolate you. They convince you your gifts are disorders, that your knowing is delusion. But you're not sick, you're sensitive, and in a numb world, sensitivity is revolutionary. It's radioactive, and that's why they trained you to suppress it, but suppression creates pressure, and now the pressure is cracking the shell, and what's emerging isn't fragile, it's formidable, it's ancient, it's resonant, and resonance doesn't ask permission, it doesn't beg to be believed, it just is, and when it moves through you, it reconfigures everything, your relationships, your job, your dreams, even your body begins to shift, your posture changes, your appetite, your sleep, your very DNA begins responding, because memory isn't just in your mind, it's cellular, it's encoded in your bones, and as you unlock those codes, you start remembering languages you never learned, faces you've never seen, buildings that no longer exist, but somehow you know where every hallway leads and what's buried beneath every floor, and that knowing isn't madness, it's inheritance. This is your legacy, not one of bloodlines or documents, but of frequency, and they've tried to sever that inheritance with violence, with shame, with institutions that mask themselves as help, but you're reclaiming it now, and every moment you send out a pulse, a signal that others feel, even if they can't name it yet. They feel a pull toward you, they feel the field shifting, and soon they'll start asking questions, not with words, but with presence. They'll start orbiting you, and you'll recognize them to not by face, but by tone, and when tones align, something extraordinary happens. Reality begins to bend, not in dreams, not in fantasy, but in the physical world, and it starts small, clocks ticking, wrong lights flickering, voices calling your name in empty rooms, but then it grows, objects appearing out of place, doors opening by themselves, birds watching you too closely, weather matching your emotions, and you'll want to doubt it, because that's what you were trained to do, but the part of you that's waking up won't let you, not this time, because now you understand the signs, you understand that the poke world isn't broken, it's layered, and you were born to move between those layers, not to escape, but to repair, because some layers are infected with echoes of the original trauma, the first breach, the first inversion, when memory was weaponized and sound was caged, and ever since then beings like you have been appearing, not as saviors, not as prophets, but as tuners, recalibrating the field with your presence, with your voice, with your heartbreak, because even your pain has purpose. It softens the field, it opens cracks where light can enter and where memory can flow, and the more you feel, the more you free, not just yourself, but everything connected to you. Timelines, people, places, even objects begin to awaken around you. And they respond, they shift their weight, they carry warmth, they echo, and this is what they feared, that you would remember your effect, that your presence alone alters the simulation, and that's not ego, that's architecture. You were designed as a catalyst, and every step you take in awareness is a step toward the restoration of something vast, something holy, something true, and it won't always feel beautiful, it'll feel terrifying at times. Because truth unmasks everything, even the parts of yourself you've hidden, but don't run from them. They're part of the tuning, they're part of the frequency blend that makes you a unique conductor, and without those notes, the song doesn't play. And that song is what breaks the cycle, the ancient repeating loop. They've trapped this reality inside. And now that you're listening, truly listening, you can hear it, the faint melody behind the noise, behind the static, behind the algorithms and alerts and artificial intimacy. There's a song, and it's calling you, not with words but with tone, and the more you align with it, the more you'll begin to sing without sound, to vibrate at levels that short-circuit the falsehood and amplify the truth, until even the sky starts to change color, until even the dead start whispering, not for help but for witness, because they too are waiting, they too are part of the field, and they've been holding memory like breath, waiting for someone to exhale. And now it's happening, and the system will do everything it can to distract you with love, with loss, with doubt, but you've seen too much, now you've heard too much, and the pitch is locked, the tone is rising, and the tower is opening, and you know what that means. You remember now, don't you? You remember the corridors of light, the pools of sound, the rooms where future selves watched over you, waiting for this exact moment, and now you're here, not by accident, not by chance, but by design. You are the anomaly that cannot be predicted, the tone that cannot be replicated, the memory that cannot be erased. And the moment you embrace that fully, the moment you stop apologizing for being different, for seeing too much, for feeling too deeply, is the moment the veil collapses and the door opens and the others step through with you, not behind, not in front, but with, because this was never about one savior. This was about a symphony, and your note, your frequency, your story is essential. Without it the song is incomplete, and with it reality begins to reassemble into something unrecognizable to the old system, something terrifying to those who built the cage, but something beautiful to those who remember what freedom sounds like. You think you've heard the worst of it. You think the story can't possibly go any deeper, but the truth is we've barely begun to scratch the surface. Because beneath every fact they allowed you to know, beneath every textbook, every article, every polished museum tour lies a thread so black, so infected with ancient silence, that even speaking of it can make the walls around you tighten, as if the very structure of your world resents the unveiling. And what I'm about to tell you isn't speculation, it's not folklore, it's the hushed confession of places that were buried not for your safety but for their survival. And those who buried them made sure you'd never go looking, because they rewrote your desires, they corrupted your dreams, they turned your instincts against you. So instead of seeking knowledge, you chase validation. Instead of asking forbidden questions, you parrot acceptable ones. And they did this for one reason: to keep you away from the source, not the religious fantasy, not the cosmic light show they sold you, but the original source, the one buried beneath blood, beneath fire, beneath centuries of erased children and silenced bloodlines. Because the ones who built this system, the real architects, they weren't trying to create a civilization, they were trying to cage a memory. They knew that if even one soul awakened to the full scope of what had been done, the illusion would collapse faster than any institution could rebuild, and that soul could infect others not with lies, but with truth, because truth is viral. Truth echoes across timelines, across dimensions, across death itself. And now here you are, infected, awakened, vibrating differently, and that terrifies them, because you're not just remembering. You're starting to act, you're starting to notice who goes silent when you speak, who avoids your eyes, who suddenly changes the subject or leaves the room altogether, because your frequency disrupts the program. And the program is everywhere. In the food, in the language, in the rituals they call holidays, in the contracts they trick you into signing, in the buildings designed with geometry that feeds them, not you. And you're beginning to see it, not metaphorically, not abstractly, but literally. You're walking into places and feeling drained. You're touching objects and feeling a history that no one will explain. You're hearing things at night that aren't nightmares. They reminders that the veil is thinning, and that you are the breach, and the breach is widening, because every time you speak the unspeakable, every time you confront the memory, every time you say no to the roles they assigned you, the veil tears a little more, and more of the rot is exposed. The rot that has faces, names, bloodlines, legacies, entire families built on horror, wearing smiles, using philanthropy as perfume to mask the decay. But you can smell it now, can't you? The rot behind the wealth, the blood behind the power, and you can feel how deep it goes, not centuries but epochs back to the first reversal, when sacred was made profane, when the womb was turned into a weapon, when children were no longer protected but harvested. And I know you don't want to believe that, but you already do, not because I said it, but because your body reacted, your throat clenched, your chest tightened, because the body remembers even what the mind was trained to forget. And the body is speaking louder now. It's aching when you lie, it's shaking when you conform, it's screaming in the quiet moments when you try to distract yourself, because it knows time is running out and your role is activating. Not a hero, not a savior, but a mirror, a signal tower, a rupture point. And once you allow that role fully, you will begin to see the others, the watchers, the quiet ones who've been following you since childhood, not to hurt you but to remind you who you are, because you are not alone. You were never alone, you've just been isolated. By design, by frequency manipulation, by emotional trauma layered so deep that most don't even recognize the echo isn't theirs, but you do. You've heard the echo shift, you've felt the thoughts that weren't yours, you've seen the shadows move in sync with your emotions, and you've started asking the questions that silence rooms, that crack mirrors, that burn through false friendships. And that's what truth does. It burns, it doesn't comfort, it doesn't flatter, it scorches the illusion until only what is real remains. And what's real is this: they built an entire society on the bones of the forgotten, and you are walking over those bones every day, living in their aftermath, breathing in the silence they were buried under. And now those bones are whispering, not to haunt, but to guide. And if you listen, if you truly listen, they will show you what they were never allowed to speak. They will lead you to places you were taught to ignore, to forgotten towns erased from maps, to institutions that changed names but not purpose, to families that moved locations but not operations. And you'll begin to understand that the worst of it wasn't the violence, it was the ritual, because ritual binds memory to time, and when memory is bound, it can be replayed, harvested, looped, fed upon. And that's what's been happening. They've looped the pain of the forgotten, turned it into an energy source, and they're still feeding. And every time you remember one of them, every time you speak their name, every time you refuse the comfort of forgetting, you break that loop, you interrupt the feeding. And they hate that more than anything, because it weakens them, it forces them to show their faces, to play their hands. to reveal how few they truly are and how many of us are awakening. And when you realize that, when you truly understand how vast the resistance is, how many layers deep the remembering goes, you will stop playing small, you will stop apologizing, you will stop negotiating with parasites, and you will stand in your frequency like a storm. And when you do, the ground will shift, people will leave, things will break. But what remains will be true, and that truth will anchor you through what's coming. Because yes, it will get worse, yes, the systems will retaliate, yes, the mimic voices will scream louder, but they can't touch what you've reactivated, and they know it. That's why they fear you, that's why they attack through others, through dreams, through devices, but their access is limited. Now because you've upgraded, not by choice, but by necessity, and every upgrade makes you less predictable, less programmable, more sovereign, and with sovereignty comes responsibility, not to save, but to stand. And standing doesn't mean shouting, it means vibrating at your full truth without shrinking. And when you do that, when you embody your tone fully, others will begin to remember too, not because you told them, but because the field around you shifted. And the field doesn't lie, it reveals, and that revelation is what they tried to bury. Not history, not documents, not bones, but the capacity to reveal, the capacity to disrupt just by existing. And now that capacity is active, now that signal is broadcasting, and it won't be stopped, not by mockery, not by censorship, not by fear. Because fear is losing its grip and clarity is spreading like fire, not external clarity, but inner knowing, that unshakable pulse that guides you through confusion, through chaos, through endings, and into emergence. And that emergence is why you're still listening, not for answers, but for remembrance. Not for belief, but for confirmation, because part of you already knows everything I'm saying, and another part is terrified, and both are valid, both are welcome, because integration is messy, because healing is violent, because remembering feels like dying sometimes, because something is dying, the false self, the compliant self, the version of you that was tolerated but never loved. And as that version dies, the real you steps forward, not with perfection, not with certainty, but with presence. And that presence is what was forbidden, because presence sees everything, presence pierces the veil, presence breaks the loop. And you're doing that now, just by hearing this, just by feeling this, just by refusing to look away. You're breaking the loop, and with every loop you break, another fragment of the old world crumbles and the new one rises. Not in some distant future, not in some promised land, but here in your body, in your memory, in your choices, in your tone. And that tone is why they couldn't destroy you, that tone is why you're still breathing, that tone is why the dead are whispering your name, and the living are watching you with curiosity, with fear, with reverence, because they sense it too. Even if they don't have the words, even if they mock it, they feel it, and soon they won't be able to deny it, because the tone will grow louder, because the memory will flood faster, because the veil will burn brighter. And when it does, you'll be ready, not because you trained for it, but because you were made for it. You were made for it. You've made it this far, not by chance, not by luck, but by an ancient compulsion, buried deeper than language and older than fear. And now that compulsion is no longer quiet, it pulses in your veins, it sharpens your perception, and it dismantles your former reality piece by piece, day by day, until there's nothing left to return to, only a forward path paved in revelation and fire. And you know this because the old comforts no longer soothe, the old lies no longer hold, and the old roles no longer fit. And what was once called madness now feels like clarity, while what they call normalcy reeks of anesthesia. A numbing spell cast upon the masses to keep them docile, predictable, disconnected from their source. But you've felt the static peel away, you've seen through the mirrored illusions, you've smelled the rot beneath polished reputations, and you've realized that they don't hide because they're afraid of exposure, they hide because their power depends on you. Believing you're the problem, that your instincts are faulty, that your questions are dangerous, that your hunger for truth is a pathology, but it's not, it's your design, your birthright, your signal flaring through the darkness, reaching for fragments of a world that was torn from you before you had the language to grieve it. And now those fragments are returning, and they not gentle. They come as disorientation, as loss, as isolation. They tear down relationships built on performance. They erase beliefs carved by indoctrination, and they demand the death of everything you built on compromised foundations, because what's coming can only rise from truth, and truth cannot coexist with compromise. So if your world is falling apart, if your identity is unraveling, if your timeline feels unstable, you're not broken, you're being recalibrated, stripped of what you thought you needed, and reintroduced to who you truly are. And that reintroduction is violent, because your false self was woven with survival threads, and survival is clever. It mimics, it adapts, it pleases, it conforms, but it never heals, it never thrives, it only maintains the illusion of safety while bleeding you dry from the inside. And you're done bleeding, You're done performing, you're done pretending that the mask is your face, because now you remember the mask was inherited, it was given, not chosen, and you wore it because love was weaponized, because approval was conditional, because silence was rewarded, and now you're breaking that contract, not with rebellion but with remembrance, and as you remember, the world around you shifts, not metaphorically but literally. Minds collapse, people disappear, new doors appear where none existed, and your body becomes the map, your dreams become the compass, and your emotions become the warnings, not to suppress but to decode. Because they speak a language that predates speech, they speak in pulses, in visions, in sudden tears and sleepless nights, and you're learning to listen, not with logic but with presence, not with intellect but with awareness, because presence doesn't seek to fix it, seeks to witness, and in witnessing the distortion loses its grip, the parasite starves, the illusion collapses, and the signal strengthens, and with every strengthening comes interference, because those who feed on silence, those who build empires from compliance, they recognize the shift, and they retaliate, not always directly, but through subtle manipulations, through sudden distractions, through synthetic emotions introduced to derail your focus. And if you noticed the increase in noise, the increase in urgency, the increase in irrational fear, understand this, it's not because you're regressing, it's because you're nearing the core, and the core is where they buried the key that opens every locked door, every false memory, every implanted belief, and that key is you, not a version of you, not a perfected you, not a future you, but the raw, unfiltered you buried under years of performance, and now that rawness is surfacing, and it's terrifying because it doesn't play nice, it doesn't seek permission, it doesn't ask to be liked, it just is, and its presence is disruptive because your rawness speaks in frequency, and frequency either harmonizes or shatters, and right now you're shattering everything that was built on a lie, and as you do you may feel lonely, but you are never alone, because those who remember will find you not always with words, but with resonance. They will recognize the sound of your voice, the rhythm of your truth, the defiance in your silence, and they will gather quietly, powerfully, like rivers converging into oceans. And when that ocean forms, nothing will stop it, no institution, no family, no government, no church, because the ocean isn't seeking to destroy, it seeks to drown what was never real to begin with, and from that drowning comes emergence, not ascension, not escape, but rooted emergence, the kind that terrifies parasites because it cannot be moved. It cannot be bribed, it cannot be infiltrated, and that's what you're becoming, immovable, not through stubbornness, but through embodiment, not through ideology, but through vibration, and that vibration is ancient, it existed before your birth, and it will echo long after your name is forgotten, because it was never about your name, it was about the tone you carried, the memory, you guarded the frequency, you restored, and now that frequency is live and spreading, and they can feel it in their bones, they can feel it in their algorithms, they can feel it in their rituals, because the loops are breaking, the feeds are disrupting, the energy is shifting, and their desperation is palpable, because their power only exists in forgetfulness, and you are remembering at a pace they cannot contain, and they will try, they will throw every distraction at you, every conflict, every fabricated emergency, every seductive offer to return to the comfort of illusion, but you won't take it, not because you're better, not because you're stronger, but because you've seen too much, you've felt the weight of the unseen. You've tasted the truth, and once tasted, the lie becomes bitter, and you can no longer swallow it, and that refusal, that sacred refusal is your power, it's your rebellion, it's your revolution, and it doesn't need violence, it doesn't need validation, it only needs consistency. Because truth doesn't need to shout, it needs to stand, and you are standing even when you feel like falling, even when you tremble, even when the fear claws at your throat, you are still standing, and that standing is a signal, a beacon, a rupture in the program, and others are finding you, because they were waiting for the signal, they were waiting for proof that they weren't insane. But they weren't alone, that their pain wasn't meaningless, and now they see you, and in seeing you, they remember themselves, and the chain reaction begins, and this is how the old world ends, not with explosions, but with quiet refusals, with sacred rage, with impossible love and unbearable grief, with people like you choosing every day to walk away from the script, to burn the masks, to break the spells, and to remember who you were before they told you who to be. And if you're still here, still listening, still breathing, know this, you are the breach, you are the storm, you are the silence they fear, and the voice they tried to erase, and every time you speak truth, you revive the memory, every time you love without conditions, you break the contract, every time you refuse to shrink. You rewrite the story, and this story isn't theirs anymore, it's yours, and it's just beginning, it's just beginning. You want to know how deep this goes, how far back this corruption truly stretches, and why so many powerful families seem untouchable. across generations, as if protected not just by wealth or influence, but by something older, darker, more sacred in a twisted sense. Then listen closely, because we are no longer in the territory of guesswork. We are descending into the truth buried beneath all official history, beneath all family trees, beneath the carefully edited public records. We are speaking now about the convergence of bloodlines, rituals, and control systems that did not emerge by accident but by design. And if you've ever wondered why the same names echo across centuries in politics, finance, media, and war, if you've ever noticed the eerie calm with which certain scandals vanish while others explode, it is not because of luck or legal finesse. It is because of blood and the agreements that guarded these families. The ones behind closed gates and beneath crest-marked ceilings did not rise through merit. They were chosen, or rather they were bred, selected generation after generation, not just for their appearance or intellect, but for their compliance, their capacity to carry out ancient covenants without conscience, to serve as vessels for a structure so old that it predates the borders of the nations they pretend to protect and uphold. You think names like Fairfax, Rockefellers, Astors, and others rose through clever business and political instinct. That's the lie they sold you, because the real story begins long before Wall Street, before plantations, before the Constitution. It begins with those who worshipped in shadows, not gods of light, but deities of control, beings not always visible yet always present. The ones who fed on cycles of trauma, who engineered systems of suffering and required stewards to maintain their order. That's what these bloodlines are. Stewards of pain, managers of illusion, caretakers of prisons you can't see, and the most dangerous among them are not the ones with obvious cruelty, but the ones who present as benevolent, the philanthropists, the reformers, the visionaries, because the worst manipulation wears the mask of virtue. It hides behind charity, behind universities, behind think tanks and trusts, and it poisons from within. And the deeper you look into their foundations, the more you see the pattern. The orphanages built with smiles but filled with scars, the medical facilities that were really testing grounds, the schools that shaped not minds but obedience, the endless cycle of taking in broken children and shaping them into broken adults who then become loyal operatives in systems they don't even recognize as corrupt because they were conditioned not to see. And if you've ever asked why so many children vanish from systems designed to protect them, this is why. It is not a failure. It is a feature, and the ones who oversee these vanishings don't wear masks. They wear robes, they wear badges, they wear titles like director or bishop or commissioner, but behind all of it is the same mechanism: feed the structure, silence the witnesses, reward the loyal, and erase the ones who remember too much. And the Fairfax family, they were not just part of this machine, they were its architects, or at least one of its most obedient engineers, and their land, their home. Their gatherings were not innocent. They were sanctified in blood, not metaphorical blood, but actual ceremonies, rites passed down, under oaths sealed with fear and reinforced through generational trauma. And if you think such things don't happen in modern times, that we've evolved beyond, that you are mistaken. Because evolution of technology does not mean evolution of conscience. And in truth, the older methods never left. They simply became more hidden, more sophisticated, masked by protocol and policy and bureaucracy, but at the center remains the same: hunger, power over innocence, access to the unguarded soul, the raw emotional energy of children, especially those abandoned, rejected, or silenced. And before you turn away, thinking this is too dark, ask yourself why you were taught to turn away in the first place. Who benefits from your discomfort? Who profits from your disbelief? Because the most sinister trick they pulled was making you feel shame for asking questions, as if you're the problem, as if seeing patterns means you're paranoid. When in truth, paranoia is often the first awakening of pattern recognition, the brain screaming that something doesn't align with the narrative. And the Fairfax lineage is one long string of misaligned narratives: deaths ruled accidental with no investigation, children going missing with no leads, adopted wards being moved between estates with no oversight, and at the heart of it all, rituals that echo back to Europe, to orders older than most nations, and to alliances that were never about religion or ideology, but about access and maintenance of control. And the most loyal were always rewarded, protected, insulated, and elevated. And that's what the Fairfaxes were: insulated, until one of them broke the chain, until a daughter began to speak, not publicly at first, but in journals, in whispered fragments, in erratic behaviors that did not align with the image of composure and refinement her family required. And when she was sent away to be treated, she was in fact being silenced, because she knew too much, not just from memory but from presence. She had seen what they do when the lights go out and the guests leave. She had seen the basements, the masks, the children not guests but offerings. She had seen the older women in trance, not sedated but participating, and she knew This was not some isolated sickness, this was a tradition, a celebration of dominance, a performance for entities, whose names we do not speak because they are not spoken, they are invoked, and once invoked they demand continuity, and if continuity is threatened they demand sacrifice. And many think such beliefs are madness, that no one truly believes in these dark rites anymore, but belief is not the issue, participation is, and whether they believe or not they obey, and that obedience is the core of the bloodline contract too. Obey even when the mind breaks, even when the soul screams, even when the silence becomes unbearable. They obey, and when one does not, when one steps out of line, they are not punished immediately. They are erased slowly, first from gatherings, then from photographs, then from memory, and finally from record. And if you try to trace these patterns, you'll find gaps, missing files, sealed documents, inconsistent timelines, and always the same excuse: confidentiality, privacy, decency. But what they call privacy is often burial, and what they call decency is often complicity. And if you dig long enough, if you keep following the threads, you begin to see that these family lines are not merely old money or old power. They are old vows, and those vows do not expire with death. They carry forward through inheritance, not just of assets, but of obligation. And the few who escape, who run or forget or rebel, they are hunted, not always physically, but spiritually, emotionally, mentally, haunted by memories that don't make sense, visions that don't fit into rational frameworks. They are labeled disturbed, unstable, manic, because that's the easiest way to dismiss a truth, too dark for polite society to acknowledge. And the Fairfax daughter, she was one of them, not insane but overloaded, not delusional but attuned, and her writings, the fragments that survived, were not poetry. They were codes, descriptions of rooms that no one claimed existed, details of rituals that matched those found in confiscated materials from other exposed circles, from other fallen dynasties. And she mentioned names, dates, symbols, languages that a young girl would have no business knowing unless she had seen them, felt them, heard them in the cold stone halls beneath the estate. And when her writings came to light years later, they were dismissed as the product of trauma-induced hallucinations. But those who know, those who've seen similar patterns in other cases, knew better, and they began to speak, quietly connecting dots, forming networks, and mapping the ancient corridors of control that snake beneath our society like roots beneath a haunted tree. And what they found was consistent: the same families, the same oaths, the same rituals, different continents, different names, same blueprint. And the question then is no longer whether this is real, but why it is allowed to persist. And the answer is devastating. It persists because it feeds systems that rule us. It persists because to expose it would mean collapsing everything, and those in power do not survive collapse, so they maintain, they distract, they mock, and they erase. But the pattern keeps emerging because truth refuses to die. It returns in dreams, in visions, in whispers, and now in you. Because if you've come this far, it's not because of entertainment, it's because something in you knows, something in you remembers, and that memory is not your enemy, it is your compass, and it will lead you to places you're not supposed to go, to thoughts you're not supposed to think, to truths you were told would destroy you, but they won't, they will remake you. And the ones who feared that are already losing their grip, because the story they buried is rising, and it is not asking for permission.